So what is nationalism? For many of us, and especially in this present time, nationalism evokes images of orange-faced, wig-wearing golf players. But as strong as nationalism might make some of us feel, political scientist Benedict Anderson argues nationalism is not coherent enough a concept to be an ideology, like, for example, Marxism or liberalism. But rather it should be treated as something like a religion or kinship to help us understand it better. In his seminal book, Imagined Communities, Benedict Anderson defines national identity as exactly that, as something imagined. Specifically, he believes that the idea of nationalism is equal to imagining a community. The community or our national identity is imagined because even members of the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow inhabitants. And yet, we feel a very specific sense of solidarity with one another. And this doesn't just apply to the living. It applies to generations of ghostly ancestors and for many of those who have not yet even been born. However, and critical to his line of argument, although the community is imagined, it doesn't make it any less real. Anderson argues the imaginations are somewhat real because there is some invisible affection we feel for one another. People perceive other individuals within a nation to share cultural experiences or to live by the same cultural code. And those feelings of communality give you the will, not necessarily to kill, but certainly to die for your community. By contrast, Ernest Gellner goes so far to say that nationalism is an entirely invented concept. So, whereas Gellner sees the construction of a community as a falsity or an invention, Anderson sees it as a creation or imagining. Thin line, right? Anderson argues that nationalism is a relatively new sensation. He attributes its birth to a number of key historical phenomena. Firstly, nationalism has sort of just replaced religion. Sounds crazy, right? Here's why. Before nationalism, imagined communities existed, but they came in the form of these transcontinental brotherhoods like Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and Buddhism. These were bigger than nations, and they gave people a common belief in the afterlife. Whereas religions unite one another through a belief in where people are going to end up, nationalism unites people through ideas about where you are from. But whereas a member of a religion envisages a world in which everyone is, for example, Christian, no one really seeks a world in which all humans join together to form one nation. Or maybe some do. Nevertheless, as the overarching power of these huge religions declined round about the 18th century, something had to replace it. Enter nationalism. But this transition from imagined destinations to imagined origins was given a real push through the evolution of print media. Can you believe it? The first published book gave people a real feeling that there were many others out there with whom they'd never had any previous interaction with, who were reading the same book, possibly even at the same time. That must have been an exhilarating feeling for the average farmer, miles away from the nearest anything, really. No Tesco to bump into people at, no club to dance with people at. Before print media, there was no way of knowing that people in a set territorial boundary did the same things as you did. For Anderson, here are the seeds of nationalism. The other ingredient for our nationalism recipe here is capitalism. How can we forget capitalism? In order to expand the demand for newspapers, print houses were encouraged to print in many different vernaculars other than the standard Latin. And following that, you have British readers reading in English and French readers reading in French. But a Frenchman could never read an English newspaper and vice versa. And here the imagined communities become tangible. Communities were separated by the linguistic differences which were inspired by capitalism. A final but also important element was the fact that during the Age of Enlightenment and Revolution, people wanted to rid themselves of this sense of hierarchy that seemed inherent in their systems. The sovereign state therefore seemed the most logical way to pursue freedom, and this could be done through nationalism. So, there you have it, the birth of nationalism through Benedict Anderson's eyes. But there is so much more to Anderson's seminal book,